I live in Far Rockaway, and Sandy hit us hard. There was so much despair. Most devastating thing I saw were mothers with their children outside who lost everything.
It devastated the community and the economy of the community because a lot of people lost their jobs and they didn't have any income.
Sandy showed me that we really need to pay attention to what's going on with the climate change.
I'm very proud that unions are taking a step.
They are actively working to better the wages and climate.
97% of climate scientists agree we have a climate crisis. We've raised the Earth's temperature 2 degrees Fahrenheit, largely by burning fossil fuels. The impacts have been far worse than we thought. We must reduce emissions quickly and dramatically to prevent irreversible damage. At the same time, we face a crisis of extreme inequality. Workers are no longer sharing in productivity growth, and more are living paycheck to paycheck.
After Superstorm Sandy, the Worker Institute at Cornell University convened New York labor unions to talk about the role that labor can play in addressing both of these crises. Sandy really drove home for us that working people are on the front lines and have fewer resources to recover from these extreme weather events. We developed the report, but also laid out the recommendations that both reduced emissions, but also tackled the crisis of inequality. It'll create many new jobs. We need to be moving these industries forward and making sure that the jobs we are creating are good union jobs.
Many union leaders in New York City did not want this report just to be considered another good report. We believe that we should use this report to engage in bold action, given the reality of climate change and the change in industry. Labor should be at the table. This is an opportunity to transition from the fossil fuel heavy industries into a renewable energy sector. And that was the beginning of Climate Jobs New York.
Climate Jobs New York is a broad and strong coalition of 2.6 million working New Yorkers. Our mission is to advocate for a clean energy economy at the scale which science demands, create good union jobs, and to support more equitable communities and a more resilient New York.
We have a tremendous opportunity to use our organizing power, our political leverage, and also our investment from our pension dollars to save our planet.
We're working with the governor, elected officials, and other allies and partners, and we've seen an unprecedented commitment to large-scale building infrastructure with project labor agreements and prevailing wage requirements. When millions have lost their jobs, there's more urgency than ever.
Industry by industry, project by project, community by community, we have the opportunity to move forward with a clean energy future.
We are committed to the change, the green economy, and we're bringing the world-class training and the workers to build it. The union trades have produced the most highly qualified, skilled workforce in the world.
We have a tremendous opportunity to be innovative. And we have a moral responsibility as leaders to continue to push to get a great, sustainable society, not just for us, but for generations to come.
Union members are and can play a really important role in solving the climate crisis.
These men and women are ready to use these skills, and they're ready to make an impact.
We are really making this happen.
Unions are working to better our wages and to better the climate. I'm definitely proud to be a part of a union.
Labor is really leading on climate change.
Okay, excellent. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight on this Working Green 2050 session, aptly named There Ought to Be a Law. What will it take for Canada and the US to get to net zero? My name is Julie Sanderson, and I'm the First National Vice President of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, and I will be your co-host and chair for tonight's discussion. I'm coming to you from the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe people along the banks of the Ottawa River in beautiful Gatineau, Quebec. A couple of housekeeping and virtual best practices for you to consider. Please remain muted until you're called upon to speak. This is a recorded session. There will be a question and answer session on the agenda, but feel free to use the chat functions to ask questions throughout the sessions, which will give the participants an opportunity to get as many of your questions answered as possible. Once we do get to the question and answer section of our agenda, if you're unable to ask questions verbally and would prefer to use the chat feature, please identify which of the presenters you would prefer to respond to your question. I'll call on participants during the question and answer session. In order to get through as many questions as possible, we're going to ask you to limit your questions or comments to 1 minute. So great. We open today with a video introducing Climate Jobs New York, and I'm going to move into a land acknowledgement, and then we'll get going in our agenda. So as we begin gathering, we take some time to pay respect to all Indigenous people, the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge the Indigenous peoples' relationship with all territories, many of which remain unceded and unsurrendered. We also pay tribute to all Indigenous people in all regions and from all nations across Turtle Island, and to their courageous leaders past, present, and future. We pay respect to traditional keepers of knowledge of all ages. We recognize the responsibility of all of us here to actively participate in a process of decolonization. Each of us must strive to question, consider, and work to change those facets of our society that continue to harm Indigenous peoples and the traditional land upon which we live and work. Although our land acknowledgement provides the necessary words, which should encourage us to reach out to our local Indigenous communities and open pathways for dialogue, it doesn't go far enough. There must be calls for action along with an urgent need to take our acknowledgement beyond just words. Let's commit today to asking ourselves why, how, and where do we start to truly reconcile? May we be guided in our conversations and our work by opening our hearts and minds to the wisdom of those whose relationships to the land continues to be vibrant and crucial to our survival. May we explore ways to introduce traditional values as well as the opinions and expressions of Indigenous people in our work here today and every day moving forward. Thank you. So I'm going to give John Cartwright a moment to prepare for his section on the Working Green summary. I'll take a moment or two to describe some of the work my union, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, or CUPW, has been doing on a fast-paced and timely campaign called Delivering Community Power, which we began in 2015. I also want to acknowledge and recognize that my national president, Sister Jan Simpson, is joined us today and will be a part of our groups working together. I'm really excited to have her here. CUPW has actively worked at placing demands before our employer at each of the last 3 rounds of collective bargaining that address CO2 emissions from corporate fleets and infrastructure. While most solutions for substantial reductions in carbon rely on provinces and territories, as well as Quebec, to make commitments and shift away from high industries that are high carbon emitters, we at CUPW believe that the federal government has a unique opportunity to use federally owned infrastructure to make a significant shift. Electrifying a postal fleet, one of the largest fleets in the country, second only to the Canadian military, would reduce emissions by no less than 20 megatons annually. CUPW plans on taking part in public submissions on C12 with or without Canada Post, and will be calling for a swift replacement of corporate fleet to zero emission vehicles, the retrofitting of all bricks and mortar facilities with solutions for rural and forgotten Indigenous communities, as well as training and retooling for workers to care and maintain this new infrastructure. We fought for and we were awarded language in our collective agreements for a National Environment Committee, which brings Canada Post Management and the 4 bargaining units together for discussion and planning on pilots and training, research, as well as the development of environmental solutions that are somewhat holistic and touch on all scope emissions of the Crown Corporation. And although this has been challenging and at times really, really difficult, we have made some strides. The corporation has now hired senior executives and staff with backgrounds in environment, and our discussions have resulted in a joint letter and the development of an environmental action plan with commitments to much greater than 2 degrees and aims to commit to no more than 1.5 degrees of global warming of pre-industrial standards with, and I'm excited about this, SBTIs or science-based target initiatives. Like others in the Just Transition movement, CUPW believes strongly that there will be nothing about us without us. To learn more, you can visit our website, deliveringcommunitypower.ca. I'm going to move on to our speakers now and ask each of them to give a very brief introduction of themselves before they begin. Each speaker has been given a set of time to present, and I'll give gentle reminders when you have 30 seconds to wrap up. I was just going to maybe show my phone, let you know when you have about 30 seconds to wrap up. This will maximize the time allotted for questions and answers. Brother John Cartwright, Working Green 2050 co-chair, will give us a summary of Working Green 2050. Brother John.
Thanks, Julie, and welcome all. It's so wonderful to see people from all across this country and some of our friends from the States who've been involved in the climate jobs movement down there. And I want to honor the leadership role that the Postal Workers Union has carried out in our movement on this issue. When they created Delivering Community Power, it was one of the best just transition documents I've ever seen because it imagined a service today and what it could be in a net zero economy with more jobs, with more services for communities, with dignity for workers, and a massive reduction of our CO2 emissions. The Working Green 2050 came out of a long effort our labor movement has been involved in for a number of decades now. I've been on the CLC Environmental Committee for about 25 or so years. And in 1999, our national convention, the CLC, adopted one of the first green job strategies of any central labor body in the world. And that was a room full of loggers and miners and steelworkers, as well as construction workers like me and others. But we came to understand that we want to have a world where our grandkids can breathe the air and drink the water. And we may bargain 5 cents an hour extra, but if they can't do that, then we've kind of failed, not just as a labor movement, but also as human beings. And so we've been on this journey for a long time. A lot of wonderful leaders in our movement have been seized with the question of climate justice. And the alliances we built with our community and environmental partners has been quite unique, much stronger, in fact, than many other parts of the world, the alliance between labor and community in Canada. I was honored in 2015 to be at the COP21 in Paris when Canada signed on to the Paris Agreement and the world started to commit to make significant steps towards a low carbon future. And coming out of that, our Labour Council created something called the Green Print for Greater Toronto. We looked at how could we imagine unleashing the power of workers in every sector of the economy and helping to drive a transition to a low carbon future, a job rich transition, not one that's that throws workers on the side, as we saw far too much of during the restructuring after the trade deals and elsewhere, not where workers are thrown into precarity, as we've seen far too much with the gig economy that's in front of us now, but one where our communities and all of us and our workplaces will be truly sustainable in the future. The Working Green 2050 project is headed up by Steve Schallhorn, the Labor Education Center Director. And Steve, it's no coincidence, worked for Greenpeace across this world for a number of years. So he brings a keen understanding of the urgency of now around climate justice. We've gathered a broad number of leaders to be on the advisory board of the Working Green 2050, leaders from trade unions from every sector of the economy, and our good friend Lara Skinner from the Climate Jobs Movement and Cornell University. in New York City. So I want to welcome you here. Lois Corbett is the co-chair of the advisory group for Working Green 2050. She also co-chaired the National Task Force for coal workers and coal communities, and is a long-term environmental leader in her own right. And I'm going to turn it over to Lois. Thanks. Hope you have a great time tonight.
Thank you, John. I'm currently the Executive Director of the Conservation Council of New Brunswick. I'm based on the edge of the Wolastoqey River and unceded territory of the Wolastoqey people. And it's really nice and snowy and cold here tonight. It's a great treat for me to see all these brothers and sisters and friends. And a little known fact, for my labor brothers and sisters out there, is that John Cartwright and I share the same birthday, so you can save on cake when we're together. Having hopefully soon an in-person just transition, green economy, Green 2050 session someday soon. I'm just going to really give you some highlights from my personal experience as co-chairperson for the Just Transition Coal Task Force. The scope of the task force was very narrow. It didn't look at the question of just transition writ large. It didn't look at workers and communities affected by the transition to a low carbon economy writ large. It looked at transition for the phase out of coal-fired electricity plants in Canada. That took us to 4 provinces only: Alberta, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. One of the main takeaways that I have overall from the task force results was at its time a really good focus. It helped us sharpen our pencil. It helped us deal with individual community needs, individual local needs, and individual people's needs, which is at the end I think we're all trying to do in the climate justice movement. The second key takeaway, depends on which audience I'm speaking to at the time, is that we have to follow labor leadership. The labor cats, and Tara Peel's on the call today, and she on the Zoom call tonight, she was an instrumental resource and strong advocate for the labor sector as part of our task force. So shout out to Tara. But my experience was that when we paid heed to what the smart cats in the labor movement have talked about with respect to just transition and what will make it work, we all end up better off. The third key takeaway was from the Coal Task Force for me was that all of these communities are different. So there is no magic solution for one size fits all solution for just transition in Canada. Let me give you an example of a community we visited in Alberta, where the coal mine and the coal-fired electricity plant need water to cool, and the entire town's small community's water supply depended on that pipeline of water that was built for the coal plant and for the mine. The coal plants on the East Coast are almost entirely all on deep sea ports. So again, very different than the coal plants in Saskatchewan. So there's different community needs that need to be listened to. And the third thing that really impressed me with the workers and the community leadership that we met when we visited all of the coal-fired electricity plants communities in Canada was how much they care about each other. Again, an Alberta story. For some of you who know me from the call, you know, I still have a couple of bad habits, exaggeration, swearing a bit, and I still am a smoker. So on one of my smoking breaks, I was out and an older worker came up to me on the sidewalk and said, "Really appreciate all the work you folks are doing, but don't you worry about me. Look after the young guys. I'll be okay. I'm going to retire to my farm. I've got some cattle. I'll be fine. Look after the young guy. Same community, same meeting, an evening meeting, sorry, young guy from the mine workers came up to me on the sidewalk and said, "Don't worry about me, worry about the old guys. I'll be okay. I'm trained up. I can transfer to another job." And it just showed me how that key message from the climate justice movement, which is together, united, we stand, we've got each other's backs. And I think that that's something, and the lessons learned from the task force are something that we can all take away with all of us. Moving forward, there will be a lot of misinformation about the impact of transitioning to a low carbon economy. And that's why, as climate justice advocates, we all need to share the stories about how that ain't necessarily true, or as Jim would say, straight up corporate bullshit. That we need to share our stories, share our success stories, and work together. One thing we did notice from province to province is that our provincial governments, with one exception at the time, were not engaged at all. I think that speaks to why we continue to focus on just transition policy and legislation at the federal level, but that doesn't mean we should leave them alone. And we need to make sure that our provinces are engaged in just transition, that they understand what it means, and that means taking it right out onto the plant floor.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much, sister. It was great to hear from you, Lois, and the incredible advocacy work that you've been doing. Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to move on now. Next, I'm going to invite Caroline Brulé to take the stage. Caroline will be talking about Canada's climate accountability. Caroline?
Bonsoir tout le monde. I'll just share my screen before I start. So this might be the moment where you see how many thumbnails I have open on my server. Does this work? Can you see my presentation? Yes, I'm seeing nods, so that's good. So I'm Caroline Brouillette. I'm a policy analyst at Climate Action Network Canada, which is Canada's largest largest network, but it's also a network of movement allies who work on climate action across the country. So our members are bring together not only environmental NGOs, but union organizations like many of familiar faces that I see here tonight, and I feel very honored and inspired to share the stage with. So I will talk about Bill C-12, which was presented by the Canadian government in November 2020. And as I'm saying this, I remember to acknowledge that I'm joining you from unceded Ganyangehaga territory in what is commonly known as Montreal. So C-12 is a Canadian climate accountability legislation framework. And so let's go back a bit to the reason why we need such a framework. Whoops. Okay, so it looks like the video is not working, unfortunately, but I think many of folks here on the call tonight will know that our carbon budget, or the emissions we can still emit to ensure that we stay below this very important threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius, is really rapidly reducing. And we know that, for Canada to do its fair share of the global effort not to overpass this global carbon budget, we need to increase our 2030 goals. So that means that as a network at Climate Action Network, our position is that Canada's domestic GHG emissions would need to be reduced by 60% below 2005 levels by 2030. The current target is 30% below 2005 levels. Government has presented a plan. They haven't yet announced a clear number. They said that they would aim to surpass the current target, but we really need, in order for Canada to show up to its responsibility in the global climate crisis and its responsibility and its capacity, towards particularly countries in the global south, increase its current target, as well as include its contribution to international climate finance. So this said, the whole logic of target setting still, even though we know we need to increase our 2030 target, is that Canada has missed every single target that it has ever set. So, we in 2020 missed this, we are completely off the mark, as you can see on this slide, in terms of where we're supposed to be, what we committed to in Copenhagen, and the way we're headed right now is that there would still be about 80 megatons, notwithstanding the new plan. But before the new plan was announced, we were a couple megatons short to our already insufficient 2030 target. So what can we do to kind of ensure this vicious cycle of fixing a target and falling short every time doesn't happen in a context of climate emergency? Well, it seems like, we're going through right now this pandemic, and we can learn a little bit of lessons, right? Talking about carbon neutrality or net zero emissions by 2050 is a bit like saying we would want 0 cases of COVID in 2050 without taking measures right now to address the situation. And so what we've learned from this crisis is that we can listen to the experts, set clear targets and goals, and communicate clearly our action plan to the population. And so that's a little bit of the spirit that we would like to see in Bill C-12, and it does to an extent, but it doesn't go far enough. And I'll come to it a bit later. So I'll explain what are the different pieces of the puzzle we see in climate accountability legislations, but the good thing to know is that other countries have done it, and we can get inspiration from them. The UK in 2008 adopted the Climate Change Act, which is, I think, one of the best practices in the world. It's often referred to as, the kind of perfect example, because so far it actually has worked. It's not perfect, without saying that the UK is doing everything perfectly, but the UK is on track to reach its targets and carbon budgets it has said to kind of as intermediary milestones towards its targets. Other jurisdictions I'd like to note that have such frameworks are New Zealand, and Quebec and Manitoba have some elements of climate accountability in their governance right now here in Canada. So in November 2020, the government put forward the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. So what it did was it legislated or enshrined into law a 2050 target of reaching net zero emissions with interim targets starting in 2030. So that means every 5 years you have a kind of a milestone or checkpoint to ensure that you're on the right path towards 2050. And also had established an advisory body. I'll get a bit later on to, how that could be made better. But I first want to note that many groups, including CANRAC, Climate Action Network Canada, so Eco-Justice, West Coast Environmental Law, Équiterre, and Environmental Defense, have been working prior to the bill's presentation on reflecting on what such a bill should look like and include. So what the three kind of key elements of a climate accountability legislation are legislated emission reduction targets, a system of planning and reporting, what I like to call the kind of procedural dance between government, an advisory body, and parliament, who have to respond to one another in terms of assessing progress. And finally, an arm's length expert advisory committee that advises and reports on the progress and on the whole system. So we outlined 5 pillars to make sure these 3 elements were there. So first, the long-term targets. Second, 5-year carbon budgets. So as I said, these are kind of every 5-year milestones to ensure that we're on the right path. And we do the same in terms of climate risks and the consequences of climate change to ensure that we don't only do climate change mitigation, but adaptation as well. And then planning and reporting elements and an arm's length expert committee. So I'll go through each of these, not in too much detail, because I do want to talk about what's in C12. But first of all, we need to have long-term targets that are enshrined into law. And it must be clear that the government has a duty to reach these targets. So that's a justiciability element, where if the government doesn't meet these targets, there are consequences, and it's clear who is responsible to reach these targets. Second is the idea of carbon budgets, because 2050 is in a really long time, and as I said earlier, we've missed all the targets we've set so far. The other reason we need to have kind of intermediary goalposts is because the science tells us that we need to kind of front load action to halve global emissions by 2030 if we want to stay below this 1.5 degrees threshold. Every 5 years, we also need some impact reports to kind of assess how climate change affects us already and will keep affecting us in the future, to ensure that we have the appropriate adaptation plans to face the impacts. Fourth, this procedural dance of planning and reporting, where governments present their plan to Parliament, and the expert advisory body responds to these plans, and then the expert committee also reports on the progress towards the achievement of the plans, both mitigation and adaptation plans. And so you have this kind of moment of accountability where there's a deadline for the government to kind of report on its progress. Finally, and not the least, it's really important that there's an expert committee, an independent expert committee that is not interest-based, but represents a diversity of expertise related to climate and the transition that we know we need to do to kind of depoliticize the climate question. Unfortunately, it's been very so far, the way governments has responded have been very political, and this committee aims to kind of institutionalize the conversation around what we need to do. So I know I have only 30 seconds, so I'll go quickly to what's in C12 and what we need to do to make it the rigorous climate legislation we need, so that we never miss a target again. So I talked about these 5-year milestones. Unfortunately, in C12, these start in 2030. We really need to have a 2025, if it's not a milestone, a checkpoint, to make sure that we're well on the way to 2030. Currently, the role of the independent expert body outlined in C12 doesn't have a mandate that's large enough. We need to make sure that that body advises on not only the targets, but also the plans and reports, and that includes as adaptation, as I mentioned earlier. Another really important element is that this is a bill about accountability, and it must have stronger language around the legal obligation for government, not only to fix those targets, but reach these targets as well. And the procedural dance that I mentioned doesn't have enough lead time. That's the idea around certainty. And the last very important piece, I think I have no more time left, I'm almost done, is that the bill brings a reflection on how we kind of share the effort between provinces and territories. Lois mentioned the fact that some provinces at least are really not doing much right now. And I think a very, very key point for the legislation is to ensure that it reflects and respects the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which Canada is working to enshrine into law right now. So that's, I have no more breath.
Thank you so much, Caroline. A great presentation, and it's nice to hear from CANRAC, of course, always leading us in these discussions around just transition. So thank you for that. We're going to go to our next speaker, and after that we'll move into a Q&A, which I think people are excited about. So lastly, we have Mike Fishman, who will be talking to us today about climate developments in the US. Brother, go ahead.
Thank you, and it's good to be with all of you. I've had a little technical difficulty. I should say I'm 8 miles from the Canadian border, about an hour and 15 minutes from Montreal in Vermont, and my Wi-Fi was not so good, so I had to connect with Susan in order to do my presentation. Just a couple of words about myself. I started as a carpenter in the state of Wisconsin. I was a house builder, then spent 20 years working in the Carpenters Union, ending up as the national organizing director. And that's where I got to know John Cartwright and become friends with John, which is great to see you, John, on this. And thank you for having me here. And then I spent 20 years with SEIU. I ran a local in New York City that was 43,000 members when I became the president. And then when I left 2016, or actually 2012, it was 120,000, representing property service workers across the East Coast. So my work in climate started in New York when I was leading that local and working with building trades and the Central Labor Council in the city and in the state. I'm now the president and executive director, if you can go to the next slide, of the National Resource Center, Climate Jobs National Resource Center. And I'm just going to highlight some of the things you have seen in the video that talked about Climate Jobs New York, which was really the foundation for our national effort. Our national effort is really to take what we learned in New York and take it to labor across the country. And we start with the theory that the climate crisis is real, that we have to act at the level that climate science demands, but that we want this new industry that's being created while dealing with climate crisis to create good jobs, and that we have to create more equitable communities. If you can go to the next slide. So you heard from the folks in the video that in New York, we had a terrible crisis after Hurricane Sandy, which really started this whole discussion in New York. My members who took care of the buildings in the Far Rockaways and throughout the city were in buildings that were flooded, that were moldy. People lost their homes, lost their apartments. And the building trades members who were out there faced terrible circumstances. And we all got together with Cornell University. And Cornell was leading a discussion about labor's role in the climate crisis. And while we were mainly reacting to the climate crisis and the solutions that were taking away jobs, we realized that we really had to face climate and that labor had to lead, because we had two crises, not just one. We had the crisis of climate change, but we also had the crisis of inequality, which of course in the United States has only worsened in the Trump years that we've had in the last 4 years. If you can go to the next slide. So we began a discussion in New York with Cornell University. Cornell convened really the building trades and the building service sector, utility sector unions that had been reacting to the environmental groups trying to shut down coal and gas. And we, in a long process, 2.5 years, came to conclude that we actually had to lead on this discussion as well, that climate crisis was something that workers needed to deal with, because workers in the climate crisis are hit first and worst, and particularly communities of color, and that we need to come up with concrete solutions to climate crisis that would build the new economy going forward, the green economy, and also talk about how workers in the fossil fuel industry transition to the new industry. And really for us, a switch went off in our heads that all of a sudden, instead of reacting to the solutions, we were creating the solution to the climate crisis and thinking about it the way I think about it now, which is that we're at a historic moment when we have a whole new industry that's being birthed to build the new renewable economy, and that we really had to make sure that the jobs in the new economy, just as the times when the Industrial Revolution took place, that those jobs have to be good jobs. In the United States, we look at the numbers that 15 to 25 million jobs will be created in the next 20 years in the green economy, and that unless we are engaged in the discussion, in the United States, those jobs will probably be minimum wage, bad conditions, no benefits. And so we have to engage and lead on the climate crisis. If you go to the next slide. So just a little bit more on New York, and I want to make sure I stay on time. In our early discussions, when we came to these conclusions, we were able to reach out to some foundations, get a little money, took a trip to Denmark and to look at the offshore wind industry, and became convinced that for New York, that was the major place to put our effort. And so we came back from Denmark and proposed to the governor that we form a partnership on climate change. And Governor Cuomo, who now is famous and infamous for many reasons, jumped on our recommendations. We recommended to the governor that they would, the state would buy clean power and put out requests for proposals to create up to 9 gigawatts, which means 1,000 wind towers. And we formed a formal partnership with Cornell and Climate Jobs New York, our formal organization, and move forward on the recommendations. And it's been an incredible process, because not only did we actually move forward and get these new offshore wind towers to be built, but they all were under a PLA, project labor agreement, all going to be union jobs at decent wages. And if you go to the next slide. At the same time, we wanted to make sure our members understood what was happening. And the truth of the matter is, almost all workers, as we engage in this conversation, know there's a climate crisis, know something has to be done about it, and are really just concerned about what happens to them if they're in the fossil fuel industry. So we started off with these kind of discussions with our union members in every union, especially in Long Island, where the offshore wind was going to be built. And of course, in COVID times, this was not in person. It was all online. Cornell University was leading the discussion. We trained members to train other members. And we've now done thousands of members and talked to them about being climate activists. And we just had a great victory in New York, where we got approval from the county councils with the support of the unions to bring the transmission lines from the offshore wind into the city. So with that success in New York, if you can go to the next slide, we took this national, and in partnership with unions around the country, we would have conversations, lead the same kind of process. We learned that we could do it in 3 months to 6 months rather than 2.5 years. And so in the last year, we not only got these conversations going, but we've actually moved forward and built climate jobs organizations in 5 states as of today, and actually 6 states, and are moving into 7 more states. During the Trump era, of course, we had to deal with the states, as you would deal with your province if you had progressive leaders in your province. With Trump as president, there was nothing to be done at the national level. And so we moved into each state built our own political coalitions and put forward an agenda in every state. Now we're at a place where, with the Biden administration, I would say it's a better discussion than we could ever have imagined. In my experience, Joe Biden has unexpectedly been somebody who's willing to talk about unions and climate change in the same sentence, and actually talks about union workers and is making the creation of union jobs or good jobs, if they can't be union, the center of his economic recovery. And just to highlight a couple of things, for the first time, he's created an office on domestic climate policy, led by two people who we have very close relationships with, Gina McCarthy and Ali Zaidi. Ali was the head of climate policy in New York while we were going through all this, and a tremendous advocate on building the climate economy and doing it with good jobs. Biden has said he wants to build union, he wants to buy union, and he wants to buy clean, which means he's saying use the power of the federal government to purchase 750,000 electric vehicles, and that those vehicles should be made in unionized plants. So this is really a dramatic change for us in the United States. He's talked about creating a climate corps, which will be a place to give people jobs who've been displaced during COVID. And he's talked about what we would call high road contracting, making sure that the government uses its power to contract for services and goods with vendors who pay decent wages, who have labor standards in their agreements. So the very specific things that we ask for are PLAs, which project labor agreements, payment of prevailing wage, responsible contractor provisions, and most importantly, neutrality in organizing. Because our belief is not only are we creating work opportunities for the members we have, but we're going to organize tens of thousands, if not millions, of workers who are already working in the green economy, who are low wage, immigrant, undocumented, people of color, who are not represented by a union, who are being paid substandard wages and benefits. And that's our sense of where we can go. I think I'll stop there. I should be at my time limit. And I would say we see a great next couple of years. It'll bring with it some difficult challenges, but our state-based efforts have really made a difference for us and for the workers in the future.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael. I just want to say that Canada was watching the US political arena during your US elections, knowing that the outcome would definitely impact climate justice. I see John Cartwright has his hand raised. Go ahead, brother. Nope, you're good. Oh, maybe that was a high five. There you go. Okay, excellent. Welcome to Zoom. So thank you for that. Next, we're going to move into a question and answer session. So if you have a question, please use the raise hand feature that John just displayed for us. And Susan will call you in the order that she views your hands raised. What lies ahead remains to be seen. And I will recognize the speaker. So once I do, feel free to unmute yourself, and please remember you'll have 1 minute to ask your question. Please identify which of the speakers you're directing your questions to, and if you want to introduce yourself and the organization that you're with, that would also be great. Okay.
Julie, if we could ask them to raise their hand in the participant function, so the little blue figure comes up, and then Ryan and Susan can see who wants to speak.
Thank you. Okay, yes. So thank you, John. If you go to the bottom, toggle across the bottom of your screen, you'll see the participant function. If you click on that, then you'll find participants. Your name will pop up. There's hands across the bottom. You'll see raise hand, yes, no, etc., etc. So I'm going to call on Peter Tabens. That's the first hand I see. Peter, go ahead.
Thank you. I just had to unmute. Michael, I was very excited by what you've set out for the United States. It's very, very promising for us. Where are you seeing the AFL-CIO leadership? Where are you seeing the leadership of UAW, Steel, et cetera? Are they tying into your project strongly?
Thanks for the question. Because we do this state by state, it actually varies dramatically from place to place. So in Illinois, where we've just established Climate Jobs Illinois, the auto workers are fully into the discussion. In Michigan also. But in, of course, New York, they're a much smaller union, and the steel workers are also much smaller, so they're really not in the middle of the discussion there. But each of the unions has, I would say, begun to really have this whole discussion, especially with Biden administration. And the building trades have really been made a dramatic difference. And some of the building trades at the national level, for instance, the painters union has just asked us to help them with their national policy and wants to participate in every state. The carpenters are the same. And we're seeing it gradually, people engaging. Our coalition in New York started with only 6 unions and now has 15. And so over time, as people have entered the discussion and realized it's not about shutting everything down, but we're actually talking about you can't shut down until you build the future. Let's build the future and let's make it union. They've started to join in.
Excellent. Thanks for the question, Peter. Next, we're going to move on to James. James Melhern. James, go ahead.
Yes, hi. I'm Lindsay and District Labor Council, just about everything else. I know we haven't talked about it, but I mean, I hope, because I see a lot of industrial windmills and all that, and what happened in Texas and around where I see on Facebook, people put out this false narrative that, you know, industrial windmills, you know, kill migrant birds or bald eagles and all this, and other things about solar panels and all that. How do you, or do we debunk all that falsehoods?
Okay, James, your question was directed at Michael, or
that, or anyway that can have some ideas about that.
Absolutely. Okay, do we have a panelist that would like to address James's question?
Okay. I'm happy to.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, during the Trump administration, of course, this whole wind discussion was led in the wrong direction by President Trump with all that stuff you just said about birds and the fisheries. We tried to deal with it by having a very direct conversation about the science, not about the lies, and go through it in very much detail. Talk about how the turbines are built, where they're built, what happens when you have a wind turbine, which are now enormous, and what's the impact on the fisheries and on wildlife. And there's a lot of information out there that we can review. And we actually talk to the fisheries representatives and bring them into the conversation. So in Maine, for instance, we're having a significant conversation with the Lobstermen's Union. They're represented by the machinists in Maine, and they're part of this whole conversation.
Excellent. Thanks, Michael, and thanks for the question, James. Next, we have on the list Zarif. Zarif, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much to all the speakers for all that they've been doing, devoting their life for the climate crisis. My name is Zarif, pronouns are he and him. I organize with Climate Justice Toronto. I was wondering, how can labor in North America stand in solidarity with workers across the global south through an anti-imperial and anti-war framework, especially as US right now is threatening sanctions and a new Cold War against China, who are the global leaders in investing in renewable energy. And they're also helping the global south develop their infrastructure to get to the point where we can have a global economy that's based on renewable energy. So yeah, just curious as to how we can build that global solidarity. Thank you. And that
thank you.
Can go to anyone.
Thanks, Zarif. Any of the panelists wish to take on that question? Okay. Michael, did you want to take a crack at that?
Well, I'll just give a quick answer. And I know one of our colleagues from Cornell University is on, Jeff Grabelski, and they have been doing a lot of work, Jeff and Lara, talking to the labor movement around the world about solidarity on climate issues. We've done some work talking to the Australians and the Koreans as needed about the kind of structure that we're building in the United States and about labor's need to lead on climate. And I think those are the practical things we can do, both share experiences and share our values together.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Our next question is going to come to us from Dave Callahan. Dave, go ahead.
Okay, the climate question, or whatever words we want to use for it, it's not a political question, it's an existential question. We're endangering our own lives as human beings on the planet. So I guess it's Michael Fishman I'm sort of thinking about in terms of trying to organize and get discussions going and generate interest in unions, whether it's in Maine with lobsters or whatever. And I look at this and I say, we don't care who our government is. You've got to take climate seriously, and not just to protect existing fossil fuel jobs and so on. So what was your experience in the United States about trying to build, if you like, this is not political? Because we've got conspiracy theories and a whole bunch of other nonsense out there. That's not about what this is about. So I just wonder, what was your experience and how did you find success in the United States in trying to make this a non-political question and just, as I say, an existential question?
Great, thank you. Michael, go ahead.
You know, I would say I've been incredibly impressed and somewhat surprised at how deeply our members and leaders care about the climate crisis and know that there is a crisis. And almost universally, everyone has experienced some change, whether it's heat, fire, hurricanes, flooding. There's no question that there's a climate crisis when we talk to leaders of the unions, whether they're in the building trades, the service sector, public sector. The real question is, what's going to happen and to their future and what's going to happen to each and every one of them. And so when we go and talk to the building trades members, those working in the fossil fuel plants, they know that something needs to be done about climate. And universally, we've had good conversation based on science. And then we talk bluntly about what has to be done and try to get people to think about your point, that there is an existential crisis. But it is a political solution to the existential crisis. We have to build political power. And that's what we try and do in each state and build those models in the states. I mean, the truth is in the United States, we do not have a good example of just transition. Those particular words, you know, a transition from fossil fuel to the green economy. And we have to figure out how to actually make that real, a just transition. And in my view, you know, what I've come to learn is it is a political question because it's about money. How do you transition people from one economy to another? You need to have money to support them in the transition. And that's what we haven't been ready and able to do yet, especially in the United States. There isn't money for a just transition, and we have to find that money. So it does become a political conversation in the end.
Great, thank you for that, Michael. So next we have our very own John Cartwright. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, well, I want to thank Mike Fishman, you know, for the leadership that they've done. And, but I also want to ask Caroline a question because she's helping to lead us in, as Mike says, it's about the politics. And Caroline, can you, at the end of this meeting, we're going to ask people to, you know, reach out and take action for strengthening the bill and talk to their members of parliament. Is there a couple of other things you think that labor and community allies, because we have a number of community allies and environmental leaders on the call as well. What are the couple of things we should really zero in on surgically so we can get the best outcome of this moment? Caroline?
Thanks for the question, John. I'll share some links to kind of share action on some specific points for amendments that we want to ask for C12. Because right now, I think it's worth mentioning that the political moment we're in Canada with a minority government means that we do have leverage. The government and opposition parties can bring amendments to the bill that is currently in second reading. in Parliament, but that should go to committee soon, and the committee will do article by article study of the bill. So some specific things that we can ask for this bill to be the rigorous framework we need to depoliticize the conversation around, as was said before, this existential crisis is make sure first that we have some checkpoints before 2030. So there's no milestone in 2025 in the bill. There's a milestone every 5 years, but none in 2025. We need to make sure that the government is held accountable, that governments, not only future governments, but also this government is held accountable. We need to make sure that there's stronger language around accountability and that there's a legal obligation on the minister to reach the targets. Because right now, we don't see this, it's an accountability bill and there's not this specific accountability lever in the bill. And the last thing I'll say is to make sure that the expert committee has a mandate to advise the government not only on its targets, but also on the plans and reports on the progress around those plans to ensure that we're really on the way and that we never miss emissions reduction target again. I'll share some links in the chat for actions that can be taken, but reaching out to your MPs, your local MP, and telling them that you care about this legislation and why it matters to labor is, I think, very important moving forward.
Okay, great. Thanks, Caroline. I had just a quick question. Any indicators when the public inquiries will take shape?
So I'm not sure there will be a complete kind of public consultation and request for submissions, but the committee will call for witnesses and, ask questions to different witnesses. And so I think, the key moment is actually right now to send some ideas and submissions, if you do have ones, to committee members. So I'll put in the chat the link to the committee members.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Julie, for agreeing to MC this meeting. You've been really, really great, and to have the Postal Workers Union, stepping up as you have, and you're also on the advisory committee of the Work Green 2050. I really want to thank you and the others that are on here, the speakers who've been with us, for your wisdom and your passion, everybody else. There's two things we want to suggest.
Hello?
In the Working Green effort, we want to provide tools that workers in every sector of the economy can sit down with employers and say, we want to bargain a low carbon transition of this work and start doing it now, not waiting for 2050. And those tools will be created as we do the research and the regulations. But we have one already up, and it's called the Labor Guide to Climate Action, which is just a 4-pager that helps local unions walk through the steps of how do you get this stuff done. Because here's my observation. I'm involved in the founding of the Just Transition Center, the International Trade Union Confederation Just Transition Center, and drawing from wisdom from all continents about our job as a labor movement to move it. But if you look at how many trade unionists are really involved in climate work within their union, it's a very small number of people who are passionate, but there's nowhere near the number that we need. If we think about the journey we took around health and safety legislation, 50 years ago, Saskatchewan passed the first occupational health and safety legislation in this country. And it was because of the leadership of a handful of people who were passionate, but they led, they demanded regulations, they got training. We partnered with medical and health professionals to validate what we were saying. Then we forced new regulations. Then we forced the establishment of committees. Then we forced changes in our Green Book, our legislation. We required that employers have competent supervisors in every workplace. We challenged the toxic material. I'm a cancer survivor because of the crap that I worked with for the first 10 years of my life that caused lymphoma. We saw asbestos, we saw uranium, and we forced employers and governments to step up and give us power in workplaces and a health and safety agenda. We are suggesting through Working Green 2050, we got to travel that same journey on climate activism. We have to give a role for trade union activists and their community allies to come together to sit down and say, we want to move to low carbon in this workplace or this entire sector. And we will add our voice to our climate allies in civil society, particularly in our diverse communities, demanding that this be a climate justice agenda and asking governments at all levels to do that. And so please go to laborcouncil.ca/climate, and you can find a whole lot of material there, including the Green Print and Labor Guide. But Caroline was here because we know there's a moment in time. And the moment in time right now is to press the federal government to be much more ambitious than they are today. This government has talked a great, great game, if you will. They were supposed to have brought in just transition legislation already. They had this task force co-chaired by Lois Corbett and Hassan Youssef. Fabulous recommendations about how you support communities as well as workers and their families, and it's not yet legislation. So we're going to put up on the chat the reach out letter on Bill C-12 that's put on by Environmental Defense. That's part of the CANRAC effort that's there. And we will have another meeting like this, maybe close to Earth Day, April. Give us a little bit of time to think about what we've heard, to engage with politicians, see how C-12 is playing out, and maybe we'll have some good stuff to celebrate. I know at the Canadian Labour Congress Convention in June, there's going to be a section, and Tara Peel, who heads up environmental work for the CLC, is with us tonight. There's going to be a section at that convention about a climate justice agenda that she and other colleagues across this country have been working on. And I know that we have amazing friends and allies in the environmental movements, in the climate movements, in civil society, in racial justice movements, that when we imagine a better world, that includes every single person working in every single kind of occupation, that we will all be stepping lighter on the earth. I'm going to end with this thought. This year, this Toronto and York Regional Labour Council turns 150. A century and a half of working people on a journey. We started by talking about economic and social justice in 1871. In 1947, after the Second World War, as people saw the horrors of the Holocaust and colonialism and racism, the Toronto Joint Labour Committee on Human Rights started fighting and helped win some of the first human rights legislation in North America. And in the last quarter century, we've added climate justice to our core mandate. And I think as we move forward across this country, and again, I want to thank everybody who's been part of this call, let's take our knowledge and our wisdom. 150 years is kind of 7 generations. And as we know, Indigenous people, one of the expressions that have shared with us is, if you're taking action today, you should think how that will impact 7 generations from now in the world that they will inherit and inhabit. And my friends, my sisters and brothers, comrades, friends, I think we're all part of that amazing journey. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Thank you again, Julie, for emceeing this event, and for all our presenters and for all of our participants. Thanks again. Stay safe and stay well.